And let's see, because this is a workshop, this is our opportunity to have more discussion between ourselves. And so that's much easier to do when we're in person. So I think for clarity, so if everybody knows where their little hand system is, their hand is under reactions. If you raise your hand, I will watch and I will keep track of whose turn it is to talk, and I'll call on you, and then you can put your hand down and we can have a discussion. Is that, we'll give it a try. This is the first time we've done a Zoom workshop. So I think we're ready to start. Well, welcome, Emily. You are the star performer today. I know that's put you on the spot. We're going to be talking about the emergency operations plan. And how would you like to structure this?
Yeah, so, when we talked before, there was just sort of a general interest to chat more and maybe just have an informal Q&A back and forth on any EOP related things you want to lob at me. So because we had left it kind of informal, I didn't prepare slides or anything. I just thought I have the EOP and I can pull it up on a screen share if we need to refer to certain sections and people want to see it. But I thought I would just kind of leave it more informal and we can just open it up to Q&As. If there aren't a lot of questions, I can just make sure there's a couple of sections that you've all had a chance to review and capture any edits you have. But that's about it for today. Okay,
that sounds great. Does anyone want to start who has questions? I have a few things marked that I want to do, but I'll give somebody else I know Jean Ann had a bunch of questions. Okay, somebody want to just pop up their hand and get going? Wow. Okay. Oh, Ethan, go ahead.
Sorry, I hit the applause emoji first. But that's actually what I wanted to start with. I'll break the ice and apologize to Emily officially on the air for kind of breaking the news with the EOP with the IVFD board. Little out of line, but I was excited about it. I wanted to share it with the fire department or the fire district and get them involved. So, I'll draw back. The EOP looks great. I think there's a ton of effort that's been put into it, and I love every bit of it. And I think it's really well structured. I haven't gone through the entire thing, and I do have some questions that I'll round out a little bit better in words and make them a little more eloquent when I can. But my biggest question is, along the way, as our world changes, as we know it does and has and is at this time, is this going to be something that we can edit along the way?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And also, of course, you and I had a great follow-up conversation. You weren't out of line. I would never say that. I jumped a little bit because I knew that it was all of the edits that I needed weren't quite in place, and the base plan was not quite yet formally approved to go public. And so I was just trying to keep the circle small. So I appreciate your patience and being willing to keep that circle small until I get everybody's edits. I will go back to the fire district board, and I think it's in March. I talked to Chief Holmes about when I can do a presentation just for them and answer any questions for them and introduce them to the base plan and all of that. So just so that's in the works too. So thank you for that. That'll be a good one. In terms of edits, like I said, we're sort of in the collection of any final small edits. The time for major structural changes has ended. This EOP process started, I don't know, but maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And I've been carrying it forward from the former emergency manager and closing it out. An example of a major structural change would be a change in who has a particular assigned role or responsibility. So for example, if the head of public works or head of public works supervisor were to come to me and say, we no longer accept or will assume a responsibility in a disaster for infrastructure damage in our jurisdiction, that would be a major unexpected change, and we'd have to have a conversation about that. And the conversation might have to be, we're gonna have to problem solve that for the next 3 years. So that's a major change that wouldn't likely be able to shift very far, or would have to have a lot of conversation and justification to shift. An example of a minor edit that is allowable at any time and that I'm collecting right now is that City of Grants Pass no longer has a public safety division. So they now have a police department and a fire division, but everywhere that happened after a lot of the sections were written in which it says City of Grants Pass public safety. So I will hunt and search and remove everything that says public safety and replace it with the correct either police department or fire division, for example. There's an annex log in each section where I'm expected to kind of track any edits that I receive from folks like yourselves as partners. So if there's a significant minor edit that needs to be tracked, then it's up to me to put it in there and then push it back out at some point so that you all know you have the most current version.
Ethan, did you have any other questions?
Not at this time. I think that answered everything. Thank you.
Great. And Jean Ann?
Most of my questions, by the way, Emily, I've read most of this. This brought back memories of last summer and doing our ICS 300 and 400 class. It brought back so much. I remembered things that I thought I had forgotten. And so this was really good, a good recall for me. I really
Are you saying I
it.
brought up past trauma for you? Is that what you're saying?
No, it wasn't. I remembered people and events and things that we did in those few days that I thought I had forgotten. And I thought, wow, I really did retain a lot more than I thought I had. So thank you for this. I really did appreciate it. And I thought, oh, now I know what she meant and I understand how this fits in. And it was really beneficial. Most of the edits that I have are more like typos and things like that. Do you want those sorts of things?
Yes, I do. I'm fixing typos as they come up as well. After you read something 500 times, you miss that you repeated a word twice or misspelled it. So how we can collect edits, you're welcome to give them to me informally now. But if I miss them or think I missed any edits, it would be appreciated if you could send them to me in an email. If you say something like on page 36, there was this word misspelled, that's something like that. If there's a lot of them that you're noticing, hopefully not, then I'll probably have to have a one-on-one with you if there's a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got about a dozen of them or so. And so, yeah, I know. Becky laughs because see, having been a first grade teacher, I edit things no matter what I read. It's just unfortunately part of my nature. And so I'm sorry. It's just me.
That's not a problem at all. And it may be that some of them have already been caught since you guys had this version. So I'm happy to crosswalk with that with you. You can type them up if you want, or we can just talk it through at a different time.
Okay. Yeah, we can do it at another time. I'm sure a lot of them have already been caught, but I did have some. I really liked the format of this, and but I'm trying to. I did have a couple questions, but now with all my typo edits, I'm not sure exactly where my questions were. How silly of me.
Well, while we're waiting to see if Gina has her
Yeah,
her
go on to
questions,
somebody else.
I wanted to see, did any of you get a chance to read section 3, which is really probably the section that's most relevant to you as city local government leadership? And did you have any questions about section 3?
So section 3, if you look at the bottom, first of all, I need to ask a question about how this is structured. So there's the first part, which is the basic plan. And then we get at the back, there is the Josephine County Community Emergency Operations Plan. What's it? And it looked very similar in some ways. What's the difference?
So the base plan has a lot of the meat, and then you have your appendices and annexes. So your appendices will be things like documents that will get added in over time, like recommended trainings, for example, or recommended emergency operations center organization charts. Those things get referred to in the base plan, but then are kind of provided in greater detail as part of an appendix. Another one of the appendixes is the glossary. There is an annex that's just specific to the city of Grants Pass because they paid to have their own specific Grants Pass annex. Again, there's not a lot of difference between the base plan because really when it comes between city jurisdictions like yourselves and Grants Pass and county, a lot is the same. There's not a lot that's different or unique when it comes to a disaster response, except for if you have your own city specific like strategic plan, ordinances, or things like that that they wanted called out.
Well, I had a few things, I think.
Okay.
And when you say section 3, if I look at the bottom, it says 3-2. That's the section you're referring to.
Let me pull it up with you, at least while we're talking through it, and make sure that we're looking at the same section together. So it'll have the part of the way that this is broken out is again for people who play or partners who play different roles. So there's roles for those who are more like responders, and there are roles for those who are more like community nonprofit partners, and there are roles for those who play local government or fill local government roles. So really section 3 is called the jurisdictional authority and emergency powers. Do you see a section
That's where I am.
Yeah, perfect. So jurisdictional authority and emergency powers. We'll start off with responsibilities of elected officials, a mention of any special districts, what it means to have emergency powers, a reference to the declaration process. And here's that, again, that crosswalk between some of your appendices and the base plan. So the base plan will kind of explain, in essence, making a declaration of emergency, and then refer you to the appendix where there's more examples or blank template forms of emergency declarations to help you if you want to do one.
When I was going through this section, that was one of my comments I had is, are there declaration samples? And then by the time I got back farther down in the book, I did notice that there were some. So the other question I have is, how can the city of Cave Junction, I don't want to say use this, can we just adopt this as the way it is so that then we would have our an emergency plan, or do we have to tailor this in some particular way?
Yeah, at this point, you are folded into the county's plan. In some future world, you may want to expand and make or request to have a standalone annex like the city of Grants Pass has. But honestly, at this point, I don't know what you would put in there. I think we need to do a lot of building before we could get to that point. Right now, everything that's in the base plan or the larger EOP covers everything that you have. It covers
That's
the
what I
staff
thought.
that you have. It covers the elected leadership that you have. It covers the basic roles and responsibilities. And that's about it. You don't have any unique ordinances or special city charter to refer to. Maybe someday you will, but you don't yet. And you don't yet have a section in the natural hazard mitigation plan to point to either, although you might by the end of this year.
Okay,
Now,
so
when
If you remember, there was a letter of promulgation that I gave to you guys to look at and consider in the original packet. And I think Becky said it's on your February, one of your February agendas to sign. When you sign that letter of promulgation, essentially that's your statement saying we accept this emergency operations plan and our roles as defined and understood within them. And that will be your operation plan moving forward. Again,
Okay.
as a, it's a large umbrella, but
Yeah.
you're adopting that as your framework.
So for example, I know on 3.2, it says emergency powers, that if we declare an emergency, and there, I did see somewhere where there's a process, I would probably have to mark that, where the declaration of, then we would have the powers to do the things that are listed under there if we declare an emergency.
So those are examples pulled from the county. And I don't know that I have enough familiarity with the city of Cave Junction to say I'm confident that you have nothing that's a unique power defined in your city charter or any of your city resolutions for an emergency. Maybe Becky knows, or maybe some of the longer term counselors know.
I don't think we do.
Okay, that might be something to work towards in the future. This can be a complicated subject, so I want to wade into it in a way that's more clear. I recently did a City of Grants Pass City Council conversation with them that was just about emergency declarations. And it might be beneficial with you guys to schedule that as well. It's a big enough topic. It could just be its own piece of meat to chew on with you if you want. I can get into it a little bit today, but because it can be a little hard for people to wrap their heads around, I want to be able to pull up some visualizations for you, and I don't have those with me. But in essence, when you are making an emergency declaration, usually you are making a request. You're either making a request to activate a power or an authority within your own jurisdiction to do something unique that's not normal, blue sky kind of stuff. Or you're saying, we're having a super bad day and we're pushing a request for resources or help of some kind up to the county, because that's your ladder of authority, right? And then the county will say, we cannot fulfill that for you. We're going to push that on your behalf up to the state. And then the state has the opportunity, to say, we have to push it up federally or internationally, depending on how bad it is. So that's kind of the basics of it. Without an emergency related resolution or charter for you to invoke as an authority or power, which I don't think you guys have yet, you'll probably likely will just be making the type of declaration in which you're saying we need stuff, people, funds, support, or we need to be recognized as having this major disaster occurring in our jurisdiction. Usually that's tied to funding, right? So if you're having a particularly bad fire, then that's really more county, but that's when you ask to have your fire identified as a conflagration, for example, because that opens up, that identification of that type of disaster opens up certain types of resources and funding. So you can use that as a tool for those kinds of purposes.
Or another one would be if there's a tsunami in Crescent City and we're getting a bunch of refugees that are coming our way and they're landing in our town and we don't have the facilities to meet their needs, we would declare an emergency asking for help from the county in order to feed and clothe and house these people. Would that be an appropriate use, Emily?
It could be. I mean, in that, yes. Always, ideally, cities are giving me a heads up if you're going to make an emergency declaration. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes declarations can occur that I don't know about until after the fact, and that's okay. In that situation, probably, hopefully, I would be aware, because we'd all be experiencing it together, that there's a wave of potential folks coming over to shelter. And yeah, we would be asking, essentially you'd be asked to the county, can county public health, emergency management, and other partners help meet this mass care, feeding and sheltering need? So you'd want to make a declaration to that level, and we would either say yes or no. Then we'd look to mutual aid. Can regional mutual aid help? Maybe we can meet the need if there's like 30 people. But if there's 300 or 3,000, then probably, then we're pushing up higher to the state on your behalf.
I was just using that as an example because of what went on in Tonga and all the.
Yeah.
One of the things I didn't see in here yet is, and something that I think about is evacuation. If we ever had to evacuate Cave Junction, there's one way in and one way out. Is that addressed in here somewhere?
It is not. So what is addressed in the EOP is mostly how we will respond and which roles and responsibilities we will assume. So evacuations are mentioned in there, and you can either, when you have a digital copy, right, you can seek any word that's related to evacuation. So you just type in evacuation and see all of your results. And you'll see it mostly comes up in the context of local law enforcement, the sheriff's office, who's going to take the lead, who's going to authorize that, what does the evacuation look like, just in very general terms. When you're talking an evacuation plan or process for your communities or your jurisdiction, that's really more internal to your jurisdiction, not the county EOP. So if you had your own specific City of Cave Junction annex to the EOP, that would probably be something where you would refer to it. City of Cave Junction has an evacuation plan for its jurisdiction, and it can be found here. And within the City of Cave Junction, here are the roles and responsibilities if we were to activate that plan. And here, as city leadership, here's how we are going to authorize or create the activation of that plan or process. So,
oh, sorry.
Yep, no, go ahead. So without that, go ahead.
I'm not sure what you mean when you say annex plan. Annex to me is a place.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it means?
So really, it just means it's like an addendum. It's an extra section is really all it is. An extra section that's just about a specific topic.
Okay, I was getting that, but I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah. And so let's talk about evacuations a little bit, because it's a hot topic, and Jean Ann's brought it up a couple of times in a couple of different arenas.
And she's tired of hearing from me about it.
No, you're not the only one. That is also can be a lengthy topic, but I'll try to hit on the high points. So if you just look at, I think there's a bit of a blurred line, right? With you're looking at the City of Cave Junction jurisdiction, your authorities and responsibilities are really within the city limits. But I think because of where you live and how you live, it's easy to kind of bleed outside that. And there's some, depending on what the disaster is, sometimes you feel like all of Illinois Valley is in your jurisdiction, and sometimes it's not, right? So it's hard to talk about evacuations that are just within the City of Cave Junction jurisdiction without thinking about or trying to pull in the rest of the Illinois Valley. But that would be where we would have to start. So if you just wanted to take that piece of it, if you had to evacuate within City of Cave Junction only jurisdiction, what might that look like? So you can make that, and who would be in charge of that? How would that be coordinated? There's a couple of different circumstances that might require that, right? That, like, there's been several gas leaks where you came close to having to evacuate a portion of town, for one example. So within your jurisdictional authority, you can look at that. And then you can tie it into the larger evacuation planning efforts that are going on outside of that city limits, that would include all of Illinois Valley and potentially the rest of the county. So with that piece in mind, I want to let you know a couple of things. There's a kind of behind the scenes at the moment effort that I'm doing to try to map alternate routes in a public facing way. So main arterial, primary alternate routes and secondary routes that people can consider and learn and understand within each of their communities as part of their own personal evacuation planning process. I'm very, very leery always of saying this is your evacuation route, because I come from things from an all hazard perspective. If you talk about tsunamis, right, the tsunami example, there's a reason that they are able to establish this is your tsunami route and this is your tsunami sign pointing up the hill, because tsunamis are a known hazard that are going to come from a known direction and head towards a known direction. What's unknown is how long a tsunami will last or how high the waves will be, right? But aside from that, you can pretty much, with pretty good certainty, tell people which direction to go. When you talk about, you're looking at multiple hazards and fire in specific, which can come from lots of different directions, it's difficult to say this is always going to be your route in or out. What is preferred, in my opinion, and what we try to do with our public education is learn alternate routes. So know the primary ways in and out of your neighborhood, your home, your workplace, and then plan around that. If people are new to the area, we can help them figure out what those routes are and where they can go secondary or third. Most people in the Illinois Valley have lived here long enough. They know that they have a couple of routes and they know that those routes are very limited. So the public campaign piece with this mapping project is going to be, let us help you define and understand what are the limits of the various roads that you have as alternates. Because, for example, you can go Deer Creek, right? You can take Deer Creek and head on out of the valley to a different valley, but not in all 4 seasons of the year.
Right.
So we need to emphasize seasonability of some of these roads. We also want to emphasize vehicle access. There are some roads that you can get all the way over to Williams, but not in an RV. You can do it in a big, a souped up Jeep with 4-wheel drive and spare tires and gas, but not in a little sedan or an RV. So we want to help people understand those and then encourage them to plan their alternate routes and practice them in a non-disaster season. So that's going to be a whole public campaign that we're hoping to be rolling out sometime soon. The Illinois Valley and Cave Junction would be included in that. Then tied to that is the reality that in the Illinois Valley and Wolf Creek and other places, we have a lot of dead end driveways, legal and illegal, and a lot of places where, yeah, you really, truly, you only have one road in and out. And there are going to be times in a disaster where you might struggle to get out in a timely fashion. So then what? We still don't throw up our hands, but you have to think about other things. So we'll be teaching people to be prepared to leave earlier. Don't wait for a level 3, go at a level 2, right? If you need more time to evacuate, go before the traffic jam, leave early if you're uncomfortable. We're going to be trying to teach people how to safely shelter in place if they need to, as a very last resort sort of situation, and also how to identify and create safety zones within their neighborhoods, in their communities, and short distances away. So maybe you can meet up in a cleared gravel parking lot that can hold a number of you, and wait until either the traffic clears or the initial wave of the event clears, and then continue moving further down the road. People are gonna have to learn, and we are willing and able to help them understand there's a kind of a series of best case and worst case decision making that you'll have to do. And it's better if we can think through those decisions when we're not so stressed. So we're looking at different public education materials and mapping that we can roll out between this year and pre and post fire season that are going to help people exercise those thinking skills, so that in the moment when they're panicking, they can say, oh, that's right, that one time we drove that road and we discovered this, or oh, that's right, we did pass that mowed field and we did talk to that owner and we can shelter there for a moment, or whatever it is. We need to just kind of make sure everybody has as many options to choose from as possible. I know that was a really long answer.
That was perfect.
There's a lot of pieces to it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the thinking in such detail. It's actually reassuring to me that.
I haven't really brought it forward because it's all in draft stage right now. We've had draft conversations with fire and law enforcement. Obviously, any public facing product we put forward around transportation and emergencies has to be okayed by county and city public works, county and city law enforcement and our first responders, because if we encourage people to take a certain action, it's going to impact what the first responders experience on the scene. So all of that's in draft, and we hope to finalize something here prior to fire season.
Yeah.
One last thing, if I can, while it's in my brain, you may have heard that City of Grants Pass is doing some evacuation zoning and mapping within its own city jurisdiction, separate from the county. Does that sound familiar to any of you?
It does to me.
Jean Ann heard about it because she came to one of my meetings.
I was listening, Emily.
Yeah, perfect. So the reason I'm bringing it up to you, because if evacuation zoning is something of interest to you and your residents within your jurisdiction, I can let you know your options. There's a financial cost to it, but I'm trying to, with a grant, I'm trying to get a contractor to come in and do evacuation zoning as a pilot project for the whole county, excluding City of Grants Pass since they're doing their own, but City of Cape Junction would be wrapped up in that grant proposal. I'm going to be talking with the commissioners about that grant proposal on Thursday this week, I think. If they approve it, then I'll move forward and try to get a contract. So another thing in the background, which doesn't really have enough legs to really talk about, but I just wanted to let you know that's out there. And if approved, I can move forward. That will be a project I'll have to bring back to you and get your participation with.
Wait, can you explain evacuation zoning a little more?
Yeah. Can you give me a second? Becky, can you help me? Can you give me screen sharing?
Sure.
I'm gonna try to pull up a picture or two. Give me just a second. I think visually it will make more sense while I explain it.
I think you're good to go, Emily.
Okay, give me a moment here. Trying to find a good picture that makes sense here. Okay. So now let me screen share. You should be seeing something that looks like maps here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was trying to make it bigger. Now I think I confused it. Give me a second. Let me go back. So can you see my cursor moving?
Yes.
Okay, so you see this says Jackson County, Oregon. There's a company called Zone Haven, and Zone Haven started just a couple of years ago in California, and they've blown up kind of like crazy. Zone Haven is the, I don't know, Cadillac, BMW, whatever cool car is these days. Still, I'm not a car person. Of evacuation zoning companies. They have a special proprietary algorithm that they use to go into your city or county jurisdiction and run basically scenarios, fire or other disaster scenarios based on your drive sheds, what they call drive sheds, your traffic and transportation routes, and the capacity of people and cars they can hold under different scenarios. Then they work with you as a local to come up with what they call these evacuation zones, all these little colored blocks here. Essentially, what the purpose of those evacuation zones is like a public education piece. So let's say you lived, your address was down here in MD 23, this little green one down here. Your house or your place of business was somewhere in there. When you're a part of this zone haven mapping project, you would receive kind of a public education campaign that would tell you to know your zone. It's kind of their motto, know your zone, and know all of the roads in and out of that zone. Because it's kind of remarkable the number of people who don't know the names of the streets that they drive every day to get home. So when we go to evacuate, or we call to evacuate an area, and we say, everybody on Peanut Butter Street and 6th Street has to leave. A lot of people on Peanut Butter Street don't know that they live there, right? So MD 23 would be a zone within our alert and warning system. Our first responders on the field would say, hey, let's send, let's just say a level 1 evacuation alert to everyone within MD 23, and we would do that. And then those within that zone would be alerted to a level 1, and it would show up on our public facing evacuation map. So it's not a whole lot different than what we do now, except for the areas that we evacuate are pre-drawn. So, and those areas don't change. So if a responder today says somewhere in your area they want to evacuate between, Peanut Butter Street and Jelly and Jam Street, I have to draw that. We have to draw that together, what that looks like. When you have evacuation zones mapped out, whether it's through Zone Haven or anything else, they're pre-identified. We draw them ahead of time and we just activate them and deploy them. The thought is that it makes it a little more efficient and less confusing for people as they begin to know their zones, and the first responders know MD 23 is next to MD 25 and they know where that sits on the map. I am torn. I have pros and cons about whether or not I love evacuation zones. It's a hot new trend, and Zone Haven is everywhere, and a lot more cities and counties are doing them. And you're going to hear about being evacuated by zone a lot, especially in California and a little bit in Oregon this summer. I think it's a trend that is coming no matter what. And so we've decided to just embrace it and experiment with it. So here's another example, uncolored, where they've broken out a bunch of these zones, and within these zones are identified different population bases. Any questions so far?
Yes, Emily, is this something we could do? We have a small enough city. Is this something we could do on our own? Would there be any advantages or disadvantages? Would it help you? Because our city isn't that big. We could almost, I'm wondering if we could do it almost by neighborhoods. We've got the Hanby area. We've got, Pomeroy Estates. We have the downtown corridor. I'm just wondering if there would be any advantages if we kind of set those little zones up ourselves.
I'm going to pause for a second. Ethan, you've had your hand up for a while.
I'm sorry.
No, thanks, Jean Ann. I have kind of a similar question. Yes, can we do this in our community? And looking at the other side of it, when a zone has been instructed to evacuate, can we apply a zone that they can evacuate to that is safe? Is there something that we can add to that?
So I understand what you're saying, but really it's if folks are going to be appointed to a place to evacuate to, that's always going to be at the recommendation of the incident commander on scene, right? So well, not even the incident commander on scene. They will mostly make the recommendation for when and where an evacuation should take place, with the involvement and coordination of law enforcement and emergency management. And then there can be decisions in the moment, depending on the incident, if there's a place to direct people to. Sometimes if it's a fast moving large event, they may just say out, right? The best direction is that way. If there's time and there's ability and the incident makes sense to do so, that's when you get the establishment of Red Cross shelters, for example. If you have a place to go there. Like if your personal preparedness emergency plan is, if I get evacuated, I go to Aunt Dorothy's in Merlin, then cool, your personal plan is go to Aunt Dorothy's in Merlin. But if you're still needing a place to be directed to, that's when sometimes, your first responders will say, there's a Red Cross shelter that's going to be opening at Redwood campus or whatever that is, or the Illinois Valley High School or things like that. There are certain incident scenarios in which the commanders on scene might say, we need to huddle people together and then send them somewhere else. So that would be like a staging point or a temporary evacuation point. TEPs, they're also called. And they can request a TEP or temporary evacuation point be set up. Those are pre-identified, but not often publicized because they are not always going to be activated for an incident. So we don't necessarily want people always rushing to, let's say, Ray's Market parking lot as a huddle up if there's not going to be anybody there to meet them and give them information. But in certain incidents, Ray's parking lot in Selma is a perfectly decent evacuation point where people could huddle up. So it's that walking that fine line between what's appropriate to pre-identify and what's actually going to be not very useful for people to be pre-identified because the hazards are too changeable and individual. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you. My second follow-up is, we talk about city limits and jurisdiction. We have about 2,000 people in the city limits of Cave Junction, give or take. But in the Illinois Valley, we're talking upwards of 15,000 people. Where does that jurisdiction fall as far as responsibility for city council, the fire chief? Where does the gray area end when it comes to our jurisdiction?
I can't answer that for you, and I would say that there's a paper and legal description of what the city of Cave Junction city limits are, and there's a description of what the Illinois Valley Fire District's boundaries are, and so those would be your go-to. Whether or not you personally all want to make a different definition, but those are pre-described boundaries.
But the Illinois Valley outside of the city limits of Cave Junction would be under the jurisdiction of Josephine County. wouldn't it?
Correct. Correct. Yep. So that's where you get into, it's, as much as possible, you want to merge or at least coordinate city and county plans that they aren't wildly out of sync.
Right.
So if you go back to really Ethan and Jean Ann's question is, would it make sense for the city of Cave Junction to do its own evacuation zoning project? I would say, yes, you're small jurisdiction, but it's kind of a mix of an art and science, and it's going to pull time away from your fire chief and your other partners, because they're going to have to be involved, as well as your public works folks and ODOT. So it can be, even though you're small, it's going to be a substantial project. And I would say, wait to see if I can get the contract awarded for Zone Haven, because your jurisdiction is included in that project. You would still be participating, but it would be wrapped within that larger county project and paid for. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting and covering costs on your own. And I'd rather you be wrapped in on this, because Zone Haven, if we can get it, is the best product. If we do it on our own, we can do it, but it's not going to be as good. We just don't have all the cool toys they have. What?
Oh, Ethan, I think had his hand up.
Oh, thanks, Mayor. Just one more question. Do you think, Emily, that if we adopt the EOP, do you think because of Grants Pass and their, sorry, I'm trying to find the way to my rabbit trail brain. Do you think that the city of Cave Junction should adopt the same plan as the city of Grants Pass in order to align with the county of Josephine to make sure that everybody's on the same page? Would that be a good idea in your opinion?
Yes, that would be ideal and best practice. And when you sign the letter of promulgation for this EOP that you have, which the city of Grants Pass has as well, and they have signed the letter of promulgation, all of your signatures and the commissioners will go on that same letter combined, and then we will all be using that as the same framework. That would be the best. If you decide not to adopt this framework, then we're going to have to have more conversations about what that means. So really quick, while I'm thinking of it, in terms of a project that's going to take your time and attention, at least a little bit, as staff and electeds and leadership, the natural hazard mitigation plan for the county is currently being updated. And your city does not have a standalone piece of it yet, but our contractor is willing to try to make a standalone piece just so that you can meet basic FEMA criteria should you have a major disaster. Now, from the time that the new plan goes into effect, which should be June or July, and for the next 5 years, that makes you eligible for some FEMA support that you don't currently get, because you don't have an authorized natural hazard mitigation plan that you fall under. You're kind of lightly folded under the current one, but you probably should have more coverage than that. So know that here in the next month, I'll be circling back with at least some of you and your public works staff as well, and saying, we need to at least have one meeting just around the natural hazard mitigation plan so our contractor can check some FEMA boxes on your behalf.
And what's the cost to the city?
What's the cost to the city? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, sorry, I think I ran over you, Jean Ann. I'm sorry, I apologize.
I'm sorry.
What's the cost for the grand scheme of all of this to the city of Cave Junction?
If we can get you wedged into this current update, you will get a very small, slim sketch of a section, but it'll be enough, and there will not be a charge for that. If you were to ask for or try to pursue a larger, beefier section of the natural hazard mitigation plan, or your own NHMP, which you could, then you need to have all your own funding for that. But I am including it in the cost of the county's plan for what we're proposing.
So just so I have it right, the EOP covers Josephine County in its entirety and the city of Cave Junction, but Grants Pass has their own EOP. And if we wanted
Can
to
I-
add, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to clarify. So City of Grants Pass does not have their own emergency operations plan. They have their own annex within the county's EOP. So they have their own section, which has some specifics, but they are covered under the county's EOP and base plan, just like you are. They just had some extra additional things they wanted to call out and will include over the next few years, but they're all in that same plan. It's just an extra section.
So where does the natural hazard mitigation plan fit into the EOP?
It's a great question. You guys are doing so great. You're all still awake. Oh man. Great. The natural hazard mitigation plan is kind of like how its title says, it's just addressing natural hazards. That sounds a little silly, but like the EOP is all hazards and is a framework about how we're going to respond and what roles and responsibilities we're going to take on when we have to react to or recover from a disaster. So that's kind of more the organizational piece of it, I guess. And then, and authorities, it speaks a lot to the authorities that you have when you try to activate or initiate for a disaster. And the natural hazard mitigation plan is a lot about, it has nothing to do with like terrorism or cyber security, right? Because those are not considered natural disasters. So it covers things like landslides, floods, windstorms, wildfires, droughts that are kind of typically the main ones, volcanoes. And it speaks to it ranks the primary threats and hazards around natural threats to our county, and then kind of lays out the response framework for that. And really its main purpose is to be the bridge to mitigation and recovery funding post major natural disaster, which usually is through state and federal routes. So for example, there are a number of state and federal funding pieces for response and mitigation and recovery that if you do not have a current and authorized NHMP, you do not get those funds. They don't consider you organized enough.
Okay.
So the NHMP is separate from the
Yes.
EOP?
Correct. Yeah. Yep. So it's its own standalone plan. Basically, it kind of sits under the EOP. The EOP is like the umbrella, and the natural hazard mitigation plan is mentioned very briefly in the EOP base plan. So in kind of the introductory section of the EOP, there'll be a very brief little section that describes the communities, what's the characterization, what does Josephine County kind of look like, and then it just kind of mentions very briefly the main natural hazard threats within Josephine County, and says basically for more on this topic, see the natural hazard mitigation plan.
So does the city need some sort of certification for the NHMP versus the EOP?
Yes. Yep. So the natural hazard mitigation plan is really a FEMA level, federal level tool that it really is required of us at the county level and strongly encouraged at the city level. And so your certification will really be a letter eventually, once the current update is done and submitted. It will be a letter of approval and acceptance by FEMA to our jurisdictions that the NHMP meets all the boxes that they're looking for and will be allowed to be used going forward. So yeah, go ahead.
So the city can come under the NHMP that the county has?
Yes.
But we would need to participate in the development of that plan and then in order to be certified.
Kind of like what we're doing now?
Correct. So, I believe the requirement is a minimum of one community, public facing meeting around natural hazards in your community and a minimum of one workshop with you all and whoever you want to bring to the table as your city stakeholders. If you do that and you participate with the consultant, my contractor, to the level that he feels is good, he'll check those boxes and he'll basically pull what he can from you to write the few pages of context that he needs for you to be approved, to be allowed, kind of wrapped under this plan. It won't be a lot. There won't be a lot of pages that will refer directly to you, but you will have, if you want to do this, you have to give some time and some attention and feedback to the contractor, and expect 1 to 2 workshop meetings in the next couple of months.
Okay. Well,
And
yeah.
a couple, 3 years ago, when I tried to pursue this, I wasn't able to get a contractor that would work with us because he was so busy doing other things. And then the cost would have been $2,000 to $3,000 just to work on our plan. So that's why we were kind of stuck. And let me tell you, I've been sweating it out the past couple years since we didn't have this, because I knew we couldn't ask for reimbursement from FEMA if we did have a natural disaster type of thing, because they would not reimburse us for anything that we ended up having to spend for recovery efforts. So doing this with Emily, I will do anything you need, including bring you oatmeal and peanut butter if you need, Emily.
Well, I would agree. It's been something that's been on my mind and a concern of mine about this. So I think we will definitely be participating in making it happen. Tina, you want to go first?
Yeah, just a quick note I'm talking about. It's in section 2.0 under community risk and resilience. It's 2-5. And it's a 2-page thing that briefly is an overview of everything that Emily just talked about. It's got the vulnerability assessments. It talks about hazard mitigation. And so it's pretty clear to me anyway.
But that does not meet the FEMA requirements, does it?
No, that's just that quick high level reference I was talking about, but that would point you towards the much more in-depth
Right.
natural hazard mitigation plan, which is currently under updating. So I just chew on that and know that I'll be making that request and trying to set up something with the consultant, and it will be sometime this spring. You can certainly choose not to participate. There aren't any consequences for you right now, but I would encourage you to try to participate if you can. Someday, City of Cave Junction probably merits its own natural hazard mitigation plan and process, but we're ways away from that, and you would have to get grant funding set up. So let's try to do this first.
Yeah. Ethan, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. On the county level, does this coincide with a similar plan for Curry County, where our BLM lands kind of merge together in the Kalamiopsis wilderness?
Can you explain? I'm not sure. Say more about that.
So if we get a lightning strike in the Kalamiopsis and it falls in Curry County, and then the fire bleeds into Josephine County and starts heading towards Cave Junction, is the EOP going to jump in and be activated, if you will, in that sense?
Okay, I think I see what you mean. Yeah. Any incident that raises to the level of requiring an activation response or doesn't even necessarily have to be activation of the EOP, but it could be, or an emergency declaration, or any of those things. It's within your jurisdiction or the county's jurisdiction, it will apply even if it originated outside of county lines. And we definitely have had multiple incidents like that in the past, again, usually fire related, where they, although the windstorm, you could argue, was also originated somewhere else. But once it impacts us, and it impacts us enough to require a response, then the plan applies regardless of where it originated. Does that answer your question? Okay. Another example of that might be if there's a major dam. So we have two significant dams in Jackson County, right? If one or both of those should fail and come downstream, we're quite a ways away, but there are areas of Josephine County that would be impacted first in the Williams area. It's not our disaster, quote unquote, because it didn't, they're not our dams and they didn't originate in our jurisdiction, but it will still be our disaster because we will still be dealing with flooding response and recovery in our county. If that helps.
Yeah.
What else do you want to chat about?
I just want to say I love how much work went into this. It's incredibly detailed. I'm ex-military, so I've looked at standard operating procedures that are pages and pages long, but I applaud your work. It's incredible.
Well, we tried to make something more useful this time, and really my emphasis is just on people learning their own sections. If you all want to flip more through all of it and become more familiar with it, that's super cool. But if I can just get everybody at city and county and staff and first responders to know their own roles and authorities and get to exercise them, we'll be doing good. So I appreciate that. Jesse, looks like your hand's up.
Yeah, voice is going out, so tried not to talk too much tonight. I think this is the first time, but I just
There he
wanted to say thank you. It's the work you've done has been incredible. I spent this afternoon catching up on it and then going through it again as you've been talking, and it's just to echo what Ethan had said. It's very well organized, and I definitely appreciate the work and time that you've put into it.
I appreciate you not putting it in the wood stove. It is cold, so I understand needing to find fuel. Other questions? Things I haven't answered? Things I
have a question, I guess. In section 4.5, which is the kind of the summary, under the Primary Emergency Operations Center, would you explain that a little more? Because it says there's none at this time for the city of Cave Junction.
We don't have an EOC.
Yeah. So I can, and those are good things to look at, because whether it's this council, staff and leadership, or somebody else, those are all good goals maybe to move forward eventually. But at this time, if your city jurisdiction was to have an emergency that didn't involve the county and you needed to activate an incident command, you don't have an emergency operations center identified. So now that's not to say an emergency operations center can be anywhere, right? I can be my own one person emergency operations center off of a hood of a truck, right? But in theory, if you were to have a whole team operating, trying to work, especially a longer term response or recovery for an incident within your city limits, you should have a place identified. And that place should not only be identified, but people should know how to access it, and it should have a certain level of security, and it should have certain ready to go supplies or supply kits so that you can stand up an emergency kind of team environment as quickly as possible.
So we're not talking about an evacuation center. We're talking about a place for a team.
Correct, yeah. So when we talk Emergency Operations Center, really that's kind of your behind the scenes hub of where your coordinators, your logistics people, your planning people, your finance people, your IT, your communications support, your net, your communication to the state, whatever, your mutual aid partners. That's where kind of they are all huddling up and should have a space to work together, communicate together, document together, plan together, right? So, and then that's separate from the incident command post. Again, most people are familiar with fire, but if you have an incident in the field that requires your field command to have their own command post, the command post and the Emergency Operations Center should be able to talk to each other. So it is helpful to have a location pre-identified. So again, in the moment when you're stressed, you're not scrambling and trying to figure out like, I don't know, is the senior center available? Do we all meet at the post office? Is there room upstairs? Do we have everything we need? Do we go to the fire? You know, those sorts of things. So right now you don't have one identified. If something happened tomorrow within your jurisdiction, you would have to just make a call and decide together where that would be and pull it together.
Is there any reason why that couldn't be City Hall?
That's up to you guys. You can
Okay.
identify it to be City Hall. I would suggest before you go ahead and say that or ask to have that stated in the operations plan that we make sure that it's equipped and capable and that that's going to make sense.
Yeah, we need to have a discussion about it to make sure there's enough electricity, make sure the copiers, make sure there's enough. We do have good internet there, but make sure there's enough phones, make sure there's, you know, all the other sorts of supplies that would be needed.
And so a list of those supplies would be made available from the county, Emily? You guys could provide something so that we know what.
I can, there's a section just on emergency operations centers and I can send you some suggested items or suggested kits. But again, if it's your EOC, you guys kind of decide what you think you would need or are lacking or wanting. I can give suggestions, but each jurisdiction is unique. City Hall makes sense in some ways, unless you have an incident where you have an incident management team maybe working a response. Let's say it's a flood, or maybe it's a localized flood. And there's some recovery and response that has to happen for a while after a flood. You could have some folks working in your City Hall while you are still doing your City Hall stuff. Do you have enough space? Can you accommodate that? I don't know. So just things to think about.
Yeah. It's a good thing for a discussion later.
And getting some guidelines from you about what kind of parameters or supplies we might possibly need would
It'd
be.
be, I wish you could all see what the EOC looks like because they have, it's the search and rescue building, but it is set up to where there are electrical outlets every 6 feet or something, or 4 feet. They're just all the way around, and there's lots of tables and there's lots of room to work. And so that makes it really nice if you have a lot of people there.
What EOP are you referring to?
Yeah.
Not EOP, EOC.
EOC, excuse me.
For at Emily's place.
Is that
At
Tech
Emily's
Way?
home.
So 250 Tech Way?
Yes,
Okay.
250 Tech Way.
Don't tell people where I live.
Well,
It says it in the book.
yeah, it's in the book, Emily. It's not a secret. But I mean, that's a really cool setup that they have there. And Grants Pass, their new
Yeah, the police station is also has their own city EOC now, which is county's backup EOC and vice versa. If the city EOC goes down, the county EOC is its backup. So you'll see that in that EOP chart.
Right.
So again, that's a future goal, or at least just something to think about as part of your planning process. If you have to, as always, we can make things up on the fly, but when things are stressful, as much as possible as you can reduce having to make things up in the moment is helpful.
Great.
I mean, it could even be your house, Meadow. We can all just huddle up at your house if need be.
Yeah. I don't have that many electrical outlets, so.
Oh, nice out. Okay.
Well, it's something to consider because City Hall is going to be undergoing a pretty serious remodel very soon. And so when we do that, we should invest in, because it makes sense that City Hall would be that center. So we should invest financially in making it set up.
Yeah.
EOC.
It might also be that we consider using the library remodeled room for an emergency. I don't know.
I think the city hall is much more better laid out than the library.
I'm going to float this by you all. I don't know if you would have time to put in the application. I won't have time to help you write it, but the Homeland Security grants are now open. The Homeland Security grant program closes, I think, April 13th or April 3rd. Anyways, maybe not this year, but next year. They come around every year through that program. They have funded Emergency Operations Center construction or equipment or rehab before, because of City Hall. And you could like double it up. You say not only is our City Hall a critical infrastructure for local government, but now we want to make it our Emergency Operations Center. And so there are funding opportunities out there, just so you know.
That would be a great idea.
Gina, and just for FYI, part of the CDBG grant for the library is that the City Hall will not use it for any city business.
No,
they won't use it for daily business, it says.
Right. That's what it is.
This isn't daily business,
No.
is what it says. That's why I asked specifically at the last meeting that it would not be for daily business. An emergency would be totally different, because I asked specifically that I asked Kate and Rebecca if it could be used for emergencies. And they specifically said it could.
You'd have to really dig into that with them, because an emergency response and EOC is meant to be available at any time and to be stood up potentially for weeks, sometimes even months. The Emergency Operations Center for Jackson County was basically operational for a whole year. So you just have to be kind of honest about what your needs for that space might be.
Right. I agree that City Hall makes a lot more sense. I'm just saying that if push came to shove is all I'm referring to. So I agree. I remember the biscuit fire that a lot of stuff was done there in City Hall.
Yeah.
So,
and there's nothing wrong with starting out in one place and jumping to another. I think in the early days of COVID, we outgrew 3 of our spaces, and then we shrunk back down. So it just depends.
I too, like everyone else has said, Emily, I've just been really enjoying reading this as far as the detail and the work that has gone into this. I can see where I was even so impressed that down at the very bottom on each page, it says Cave Junction, Oregon, that this was personalized for our city. And I was so impressed that you had done that.
Just for you guys.
I know, you really did. And I thought, wow, I thought this was just Josephine County, but no, this is specifically for us. What I did is I took all of this and I put it on my iPad so that it's with all of my material from 300 and 400, so that now I have it all digital as well as this hard copy, so that in case there were an emergency, I could access it either with hard copy or digitally. And I thought that way I could be as mobile as I need to be. So it wasn't easy to do necessarily with the iPad, but I was able to do it. So
Yeah, just remember this is the sort of framework it's best to be familiar with pre-disaster times. And there's not really specific response plans in here. So if you were to have a landslide within your jurisdiction and you picked up the EOP, the EOP is not going to give you specifics about how to respond to a landslide in your jurisdiction, but it will kind of generalize roles and responsibilities that should guide you if you have nothing else to fall back on, if that makes sense.
Jesse, did you have Ethan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just one last question. With the population of Grants Pass very heavily outweighing the population of the city of Cave Junction, does their amendments or annexations, forgive me if I have the wrong term, supersede the city of Cave Junction in the event of a county-wide emergency?
I don't know if I quite understand that. Who in your scenario that you put forward, who's having a worse day? You or the city of Grants
So
Pass?
the county's having a serious bad day, like the Mackenzie River fire that just swept through like crazy, and it swept through Grants Pass, and not quite so much in Cave Junction. Does the EOP supersede our actions out here in the city of Cave Junction?
There's no superseding. It should be a guide to you, but there's not a hierarchy. So within the EOP, in your roles and responsibilities, they're almost equivalent. If you look at like fire, for example, or LE or public works, whether they're city or county fire or public works or LE or any of those, or city GP leadership versus city CJ leadership, your roles and responsibilities and authorities are virtually identical. So in terms of your response, there's no difference. If you're talking about how to like allocate resources, it's really who has the most need and the highest impact. So if you had 2 fatality events, one within the city of Grants Pass and one in the city of Cave Junction co-occurring at the same time, and you both went to the county or asked the county to ask the state for assistance, they would probably respond to who has the most impact within that mass fatality. Is it 10 people or 1 person? That sort of thing.
Mhm. I had one other question. On section 6, page 7, it talks about a disaster registry through RVCOG. And is it possible to find out how much work has been done in the Illinois Valley on this?
Yeah, I can even connect you or it depends on how much information you want. Cassie Rose is the new disaster registry lead and coordinator, and she's been on KXCJ recently, a couple weeks ago, I think it was, talking about the disaster registry. So she would be the person to have any direct answers about what's been done within your jurisdiction.
Is Kathy Rose at RVCOG?
Cassie Rose, yes, she's with RVCOG, and she's the coordinator for that disaster registry.
I probably will contact her.
Yeah, so if you need her contact information, just let me know and I'll give
Okay.
it to you. What other burning questions can I answer or not answer?
You've done all mine pretty much.
What about edits? I know I have to get with Jean Ann for her many grammar concerns. Who
Well,
else
let
has
the two of
edits?
you get together. We don't have to go through that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm gonna have her, I'm gonna talk to her separately, but does anybody else have edits that they saw that they wanted me to note?
I leave that up to Jean Ann. I figure she'll catch them. I just want to make sure that, Jesse, if you're there, if you had any comments.
I am here and I have been listening, and I think the council, again, I apologize for not being more active. Voice is not here today, but I think the council's done a terrific job with the questions. I had a list and you guys all asked them for me, so I appreciate that.
Okay, very good.
It does sound a little harsh. I think we're probably done. Sounds like just a reminder then that Becky's gonna be putting on your agenda the letter of promulgation here at some point in the near future. And that letter, I think, is set up just to have the mayor's signature, but obviously you'll discuss it. With your signature on that letter is basically your official acceptance of the EOP as your guiding framework for response and roles. And I'll be looking for that. And then if you want just a standalone chat at some point in the future about emergency declarations and how to do one and why or when or what that looks like, we can schedule that and I can dig more deeper into that if you want to. We don't have to, but it's up to you guys.
And also, I believe you were, there'll be some follow-up about the natural hazard mitigation plan.
Yes, I will be talking to my contractor this week and I'll make a note to see how he wants to start that with you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll be watching for that because I do think it's really important that we follow through for us on that.
Okay.
Well, seeing and hearing no other comments, I would definitely really want to thank you for all the hard work. This is, it was pretty amazing to go through this. And I appreciate you coming back to us, and we're all in this together.
Yes, happy to, and I have no problem reviewing or being asked again later about stuff that we talked about. The more we all are comfortable with these ideas, the better we'll do if we ever have to use them. Hopefully we won't, but I'm gonna sign off unless anybody else has anything else for me right now.
I don't believe so. So thank you very much, everybody. I think this was a very informative workshop. So,
Okay, you all have a good evening. I'm gonna run away.
all right, bye-bye. Have a
Thank you.
good one.
Okay, bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.